morning, everybody. So we are here in this, I don't know, for some of you I guess it's an old place because that's where it used to be. Bible study before COVID was here. For me it's a new place. You know, I've never taught. I think that we did it once. But you know, mostly we did it in the fellowship hall. So, you know, whatever we do is great. We have a cool book for today, I believe. It's Daniel. People are confused sometimes by the visions, especially in the last three, I want to say chapters, but it's like actually 3 blocks. So to begin, I need to clarify one particular thing. In Daniel, okay, in your book, if you have a Protestant edition of the Bible, you have 12 chapters, right? And if you have a Catholic edition of the Bible, you have 14 chapters, okay? And we are not going to talk about 13 and 14, chapter 13 and 14, but if you have 12 chapters in your 12 chapters for the book of Daniel in your Bible, it's actually 10 blocks, 10 chapters. Book of Daniel is one of the most clearly, how can I say, most obviously designed and most clearly cut. The only reason for chapters 10, 11, and 12 to be split in 3 different chapters is the length. The vision that he begins to see in chapter 10 doesn't end till the very end of 12. So whoever divided Bible into chapters and then verses decided that that's kind of too long to read, so let's have chapter 10 and then 11 and then 12. So that's the thing. So we can constantly talk about 10 blocks. Now, who is Daniel? Daniel is a very interesting guy. He was brought to Babylon with the first settlement of people in exile. So it's 605, and therefore we need to remind ourselves of the timeline. Not the whole timeline, I'll just draw a shorter one. Okay, let's say this is the cross, this is 30 AD. So we have a destruction of Jerusalem somewhere here, which is 586, okay, BC. That's a destruction of the temple. Okay? But this is not the first moment when Nebuchadnezzar came, the Babylonian king came first time. He came, actually, the first time he came was about 20 years prior in 605 BC. Okay? And from this time, we have 70 years of 70 years of Babylonian captivity. Okay, so that will bring us to 536 BC. These 2 days are important because that's the frame, time-wise, it's the framework for the book of Daniel. He begins, chapter 1 begins with 605, and at the very end of the first chapter, we actually have a name that brings us to the very end, which tells us that the book is kind of, the covers of the book, you know, the front page and the last page are within this 70 years. Let's see, Daniel 1:1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the territory of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both the royal family and the nobility, youth without blemish and a good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent in standing in the king's palace. So that's how Daniel and 3 of his friends ended up in Babylon. That's 605, before the destruction of the temple. And then if we go to the very last verse of this chapter, And Daniel was there, so in Babylon, till what? Till the first year of King Cyrus. Okay, Cyrus is a Persian king who comes, defeats Babylon. He's the one who defeated Belshazzar in chapter 5. And that's where restoration begins. So the announcement about reconstruction of the temple is dated 536. So if we read carefully, now let's go into chapter 10. Chapter 10 begins that in the 3rd year of Cyrus the king, there was another vision. So 533 BC. So that's the timeline for the book. Okay? Or, say it more precise, that's the timeline when the book was written. Because in chapters 8, 9, and 10 through 12, so the last 3 visions, we have something that tells us of the future up to the time of Christ. Okay? So that's important to understand. Now, the book is structured, as I said, very well. We have 10 chapters or blocks. We also have, I would not be I, or I would not be me, whatever the right phrase is, if I would not see a chiastic structure. So we have something in the beginning which matches something at the end. What matches is the language. Book of Daniel is the first one where we have an Aramaic insertion. Okay? So all of you probably know that what we call Old Testament is written in Hebrew. Okay? Old Hebrew, not modern Hebrew. Okay? And the New Testament we have in Greek. But even within the Old Testament, we have quite a long section in the book of Daniel, which is written in Aramaic. Okay, it's a Semitic language, close to Hebrew, but not Hebrew. Okay, I don't know what to say. Not even close than American English and British English. It's a little bit further apart. I don't know, with my limited knowledge of languages, it's probably something like Spanish and Portuguese. Something like that. So you can kind of guess some of the words. Some of the roots are the same. Grammatical structures are somewhat close, but not really, not the same. Okay? So we begin, as you see in the structure, you have A, big A, Hebrew, chapter 1, and then A prime, chapters 8, 9, and 10 through 12. Okay? And then the middle section is Aramaic. And then within Aramaic, we have 6 chapters that are structured chiastically. So, where are my glasses? Like, for example, chapter 2. In chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar dreams, he has a vision of the statue. Okay, and the statue is the head of gold, and there is a silver, then there is a bronze, and then there is a mix of, there is a iron and mix of iron and clay. Okay, so it's 4 kingdoms, 4 periods, and he has a dream about that. And then in chapter 7, matching, so it's A small, A prime small. In chapter 7, Daniel sees the vision about 4 kingdoms. 4 success, kingdom that will be kind of rolling one into another with success in time. Then B and B prime, we have a test of faith. In A, we have a test of faith of 3 young guys. Okay? And as you know, in our hymnal, there is a hymn 931, All Your Works of the Lord. And it says usually, Song of 3 men, 3 young men. And people are like, who are those 3 guys? Okay, that's the guys. And that's their song when they were in the fiery furnace, kind of like one we have in the room that makes the noise, the fiery furnace. But the thing is, we do not have it. If you have a regular Protestant Bible, you do not have those words. Those words are available if you buy a supplement which is called, for whatever silly reason, Apocrypha, or if you read the Catholic Bible. So That's a cool thing. So B prime that's Daniel himself goes through the test of faith. That's where he ends up in the lion's den. In both of those tests, it's not kind of like a multiple choice test. It's not a test to get your driver license. You know, if you fail, okay, come tomorrow. You can have another chance. No, both of those tests were like up to the point of death. So it's a deadly threat. Both boys are thrown into the fire, and Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. And depending on the children's Bible you buy and read to your kids or to your grandkids, you might see sometimes the nice pictures. You know, Daniel sits at the bottom of the pit, and nice, lions are kind of putting, their head on his lap, and he kind of like pats them, plays with them. That's not what happened, not even close. You need to be very careful with what kind of pictorial theology you present to kids, because then they're hit with real life, and they look surprised. That's not what they have been taught. So what happened is, bunch of lions were very, very hungry. We know they were hungry. How do we know it? Now, first of all, we know from kind of like general observation and tradition, they were not really fed except something was dropped to them. But even from the story, we know they were hungry. Because when the Daniel was pulled out and the guys who accused him were thrown down, they did not even reach the bottom of the pit. Lions, grabbed them in the air. They were so hungry. Plus, Daniel confesses that the angel of the Lord shut their mouths. Okay, shut their, throats or whatever. Yeah. So he preserved him. It was, in both cases, there is this angelic figure that appears and preserves the one who goes through the test of faith. And then C and C prime, chapters 4 and 5, we have judgment and conversion of, in chapter 4 we have conversion of Nebuchadnezzar. He goes basically through death and resurrection. And chapter 5, we kind of see the same pattern. We see judgment and possibly conversion of Belshazzar. Okay, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. He also goes through his semi-death and resurrection, and we know that from few things that we can notice. For example, if we will be in chapter 5, just for a second. In chapter 5, verse 6. So when the king sees the writing on the wall, the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him, and the limbs gave way, and the knees knocked together. And the king called loudly to bring enchanters, the Chaldeans and astrologers, and kill and declare the wise, and so on and so forth. And the thing is, it's not the best translation. The thing is that the second thing, his thoughts, his color changed, his thoughts alarmed him, and when we have his limbs give way, his organs got loose. Okay, that's a polite phrase to mean that he kind of pooped himself, and we know when this stuff happens. When the body is dead, everything, muscles are relaxed, and that's kind of stuff that goes on with a person. Okay? So, not physically, but symbolically, he goes up to the point of being dead, and from here, he gets, he goes into resurrection state because he calls for, not actually him, his mother, calls for Daniel, and he was able to interpret the story. Now, with section A prime, as you can see, we also have a chiastic structure. It is vision of 3 kingdoms in animal forms in chapter 8, and then in the middle there is a judgment of your city. And your city means the capital of those kingdoms. Not necessarily physical capital. Because we go from Babylon, we go to, in Persia, it was Susa, and then we go to, when we go into Greek empires, and especially after Alexander the Great, when it broke into 6 pieces, everybody had their own capital, and then of course we have Rome, but the spiritual capital should be Jerusalem, and that's your city. And first, there is a judgment, but on the other hand, there is also a resurrection. And then there is a vision of 3 kingdoms in human terms, when basically he goes from king to king and explaining the history, as I said, up to Jesus. I know Book of Daniel is sometimes considered hard to understand, but actually you can obviously and very clearly see 2 main themes. One is faithfulness and submission of the faithful guys to the local authorities, yet maintaining their confession of faith. So you need to submit to the ruling authority in everything what they say, as long as you do not need to compromise your faith. But when it comes to faith, you stay strong and you go through those, either fiery furnaces or lion's dens. And along with that, there is a theme of kingdom development. Especially we can see it in the visions when we see those empires unfolding. I gave you some translation of some names. And the only thing about the names, let's see a very interesting thing. In chapter 1, in chapter 1 we have Daniel and 3 guys. So verse 6, among these, those noble guys who were granted, in our terms, they were granted full scholarship for the Department of Political Studies at the Babylonian State University. Okay? And Daniel graduated with that, I guess, cum laude, with honors, and became a mayor of Babylon. Not the empire, he became a mayor of the capital. But Daniel and 3 of his guys. So the guys are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Okay? And then the chief of the eunuchs gave them the name. So he renames them. Okay? He changes Daniel into Belteshazzar, and that's very interesting. In the chapter 5, we have a guy, grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, who is Belshazzar. Daniel's name sounds not identical, but very close. There is additional syllable, in the name, Belteshazzar. And then Hananiah turns into Shadrach, Michael into Meshach, and Azariah into Abednego. What is interesting is when they go through their trial, at the very end of the chapter, who do we see? In verse 19, King spoke with them, okay? Those 4 guys. And among all of those, none was found like. So he speaks to all the graduates, and he can identify the wisdom and the great success of the program in 4 guys. What's the name of the guys? The name of the guys is, again, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. What that tells you, what it should tell you, is the Babylonian names did not stick to them. Okay? They were kind of, so when you change a name, you change some aspect of identity. Okay? Whoever gives the name, he is in control over the person to whom name is given. Okay? God gives us a name of forgiven and justified in the baptism. Okay? Therefore, he can claim us as his own. That's why the whole idea of sons and daughters of God, the family of God is so important. Because he's, as a father, he gives us new name. Okay? Being sinful in Adam, we are given a name, justified, saved, and forgiven. Okay? That's the new name. Therefore, when When the serviceman of Nebuchadnezzar tries to change their name, apparently it did not really work out. We will have through the whole book, and in other books too actually, like in Ezekiel, we will see name Daniel appeared over and over again. So their names were not changed. We see that they stuck with their own Jewish and faithful identity. Now, there are some other things which are somewhat important to understanding of the book of Daniel. First, as I mentioned, the other themes is a theme of third period, third day or third year or third period of time. Why do we need to notice that? In the Bible, okay, I probably need to pull it up. Yep. Yes. Okay, in the Bible, in the story of creation, we have days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay? Day 3, unlike many others, has like 3 half and then another half. So we have some action first part of the day and some action, another action, second part of the day. What is done in the first part of the day 3 is a completion of what began in day 2. Because in day 2 we see firmament that separates waters from above from waters from below. And then waters from below are separated in first part of day 3. So we kind of see one action and then we have a break in between them. Okay? And so after forming, we go into feeling. So second part of the day 3 is we already have water and the land, and land now is filled with grains. Okay? I hope you can understand that this is a grain. And trees. And trees have their fruits. Okay? Something like that. It's not chicken folks, don't worry about that. So, we see that day 3 is, I know in our mind when we hear word judgment, it's always negative. Okay? In the Bible, word judgment does not necessarily mean negative thing. We kind of need to substitute it, learn to substitute it with evaluation. So God evaluates this period and then He begins something really new that pushes till the last day when we have everything was done good. Okay? So what we have in the Bible very often is in period 3 we have a preliminary judgment or evaluation. And then the 7th one is your final, Sabbath, your Sabbath rest. And you have your rest based on what you have done through the first 6 days. Okay? So it's like students, if you have not done your homework, you cannot go to church. You have to get stuck at home and do your homework, or you get for a second year, whatever the thing is. Think about that. Okay? Roughly, like in our timeline, and I will reproduce that part over here. About 30 AD, we have death and resurrection of Jesus. And then something else happens on 70 AD. What happened, very important, in the biblical history in 70 AD? Destruction of the temple.
Again.
Okay? Destroyed. What did Jesus say about His body? It's coming back in 3 days. Okay? But when they rejected the testament about Jesus, the temple was destroyed. 30, 70. Okay? So you have 3 kind of decades here, and you have another 4 when the judgment fell in full. Okay? So God brings his judgment on Jesus, telling them what will happen if they will reject his testimony. And since the church got persecuted within this time instead of being embraced, those same Jewish guys who were worshiping in the temple were rejected because they confessed that Jesus is the Messiah. And because they got persecuted, God got really upset. And what we see at the very end, that's how book of Acts ends. Let's go to the book of Acts, chapter 28. So Acts 28:28. Before you find the verse, so what we find in chapter 28 is Paul arrives to Rome. Okay? In the Bible, the only guy who reaches Rome is Paul. As far as we know, again, from the Bible, not from tradition. No other apostle ever came to Rome, but Paul did. So he comes to Rome. He is in the hotel. He is not in chains, literally in chains. Okay, he is in the kind of fancy Hilton hotel because he was somewhat relatively rich guy, not rich, but well done, middle class. Let's put it this way. Or upper middle class, whatever, not important. So he's in the hotel, and the Jewish leaders of Jewish community of Rome came to him, which is interesting. Think about that. Somebody came, I don't want to upset anybody, like Zimbabwe, to Washington, D.C., some kind of great preacher. And the leaders of Christian community in Washington, D.C. came to his room in Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. How fancy is this guy? And that's basically what we see. Paul was a big deal guy. Again, not necessarily financially, but spiritually, he had some impact on people. People come to him, and he talks to them. He tries to witness. He tries to win them over to this wonderful idea that Jesus is the Messiah. Some of them did believe, but many of them did not. And therefore, at the very end, when they kind of getting out of his room, he tells them, he shares with them the prophecy of Isaiah from chapter 6, and we're not going to read that, but he concludes his small kind of spiel with the phrase, verse 28. Therefore, let it be known to you that this salvation of God, so this testimony about Jesus, this salvation of God, has been sent to Gentiles. They will listen. Okay? So we have a preliminary judgment on the sacrificial system and the leadership in 30 AD, and then 4 periods later we have a full judgment that now it's not going to be confined within the Old Testament Judean settlement. It's going to go to Gentiles, to all the nations. And that's what we see. From now on, from 70 AD, the gospel goes to all other nations, and that's how we got it here. And that's why we are blessed to live in St. Louis Obispo. We do not need to go to Jerusalem on regular feasts, even though to go to Jerusalem would be a fun idea. But for a different reason. Okay? So, that's thing number 1 about 3 periods. Thing number 2, again, we need to understand that Daniel is a faithful disciple of Jeremiah. Okay? Because Jeremiah, let's go back here. Jeremiah, let me use some other color. He began to preach roughly 30 to 40 years before Daniel ended up in Babylon. So he was, his Sunday school teacher. Let's do it this way. So even though he was relatively young, he probably was about 15 years old, he listened enough and he paid close attention to what Jeremiah used to prophesy before, and most likely, it looks like maybe they were in correspondence within these 20 years. So when 70 years that Jeremiah had talked about came to completion, he prays and writes down the vision that God gave to him, and he hopes for restoration of Jerusalem. And we see this in chapter 9 of Daniel. Okay, so in Daniel refers to that. The first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, by the seed of Amid, who was made king over the realms of Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books of numbers of the year that, according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, okay, that must pass before the end of desolation of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. And actually, and I wrote it for you, he refers back to what Jeremiah has said in his book, and we have this recording in chapter 29, verses 4 through 10. And also, it's very interesting that the book of Ezekiel also refers to Daniel 3 times. In chapter 14 twice, and 1 time in chapter 28. And we've talked about this last time. Ezekiel is roughly, let's have another color. See, that's why whiteboard is so cool. You know, Ezekiel came to Babylon a little bit later, and we don't know how long his ministry was, but they kind of overlap. So this is Ezekiel. You know, the period of Ezekiel overlaps with period of Daniel. So we need to see them as contemporaries. In the Lutheran teaching, the book of Daniel is used quite extensively. And it's very interesting. They usually refer to chapter 4, you know, a couple times, and also chapter 8 and 11 and 12, but that's in a historical setting. And one thing is they discuss the theology of faith, that the faith is required. Even when Daniel addresses Nebuchadnezzar that you need to change your ways, it means that you can do it under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. An Apology of Augsburg Confession says that he includes repentance. He converts the king, Daniel, converts the king not only to give alms, but much more to have faith. And then also we have a discussion of mass or worship, which is based on the proper understanding of Daniel. There is one more important thing. The thing where the word, we talked about this last time, that in the book of Ezekiel, the term Son of Man is used 93 times. The only time the term Son of Man is used in the Old Testament is in the book of Daniel in chapter 7, in verses 13 and 14. And what we see here in chapter 7, verse 14, we see that to him, to the Son of Man, who comes to the Ancient of Days, is given dominion, the glory, and the kingdom, and all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him, and his dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one, and shall not be destroyed. And this verse is very important for an understanding of the nature of Christ that we discuss in the Formula of Concord. So, to conclude, a couple words about the relevancy of the book. The book of Daniel is important on 2 levels. On the personal one, or devotional, and historical. On the personal level, in the book we can see a single person, or sometimes it's a group of people, who can resist the outer pressure of godless powers and authorities. The book gives us page after page examples of faithful ones who were ready to risk their lives presenting the gospel to the hostile society. That's a good lesson for us. I mean, we do not live in exactly the same times. I mean, at least so far, nobody, I hope, throws you or me into fiery furnace or to the lions of Dan. But, you know, society is society that we have, and it's less and less open to hear the good news of Christ. And at the very same time, we also see the global picture of development of God's kingdom, using the powers of human empires. Because we see that every empire, Persia that comes after Babylon, Greece that comes after Persia, and then Rome that comes after Greece, all of those empires basically do nothing but help and support the kingdom of God. And then when they, in the beginning of the rule, and then at the very end, they kind of begin to collapse, something else comes over and, you know, replaces them. So Babylonian Nebuchadnezzar, being a converted and faithful king, his kingdom is replaced by Persia. And Cyrus is a faithful king. He is the guy who lets exiles go home and rebuild the temple. But when his kingdom collapses, Alexander the Great comes, who did not destroy the temple. He actually came and visited and made agreement with Jerusalem temple. And hopefully because of that, he got some blessings for his wars or whatever the thing he did. And then, but when Greece as an empire began, first of all, morally and unfaithfully collapse, then Rome comes. And the Romans are the guys who support and protect the kingdom of God. Always remember that in the trial against Jesus, it is Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who tries to save him. He is the guy, I wash my hands. I mean, we can discuss his motives or something, but he is the one who did, if not everything, but almost everything to save Jesus from the oppression. Okay? It's the Jewish community who tries to, you know, to make sure that the crowd cries, crucify him, crucify him. Okay? Relatively similar story we see in Paul in the book of Acts. It is Romans, if they grab him, they try to protect him from the crowd. It is the crowd, usually Jewish crowd, who basically wants to tear him apart. You know, so as in the Bible, in the New Testament, Romans are, I wouldn't say bad guys, but they are good guys. They are protective guys. Okay? That's an outer force that protects the growth of the kingdom. So when it was replaced, slowly but surely, Rome also collapsed, and the Roman Empire was replaced by Holy Roman Empire. And in the very beginning, Holy Roman Empire was a good thing. It's an establishment of monasteries and school and giving people an education and so on and so forth was the way to flourish and bring the good news of the kingdom to the nations. You know, a bunch of missionaries going to outer lands and so on and so forth. Slowly but surely, that collapsed too. And now we have another period of civilization. And apparently this period of civilization also comes to its, you know, what's that? Something that was, we could see the forecast, you know, end. So, but how long that end will take, we don't know. So let's enjoy it while we can. Okay, questions or comments?